What's up everybody, welcome back to the episode of Outlawed Motors where we're continuing the Monster Mini build and getting this sucker into that space. Now obviously as the engine sits right here, it's pretty much ready to go in, but it took a lot of work to get it to this point. I certainly didn't pick it up from Competition Automotive, who are my engine builders, in this form. Pretty much I just get a nice clean block and everything else is up to me. If you caught the engine assembly video, you know some pretty crazy things have been done to the Mini's engine. Forged pistons, rods, ceramic coated pistons and valves, upgraded valves, springs, retainers, lifted cams. The intake and exhaust ports have been ported to allow for more breathing room for that big turbo to do its thing. And that doesn't even get to the outside of this engine, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I've never rebuilt a car. All of this is kind of a first time for me, although I have done a lot of dumb things in the past. This might be the top, but I have no regrets because this thing is going to be badass. My strategy for putting this engine back together was do as much as I can on assembling everything around the engine before I try to put it in the engine bay. Now, before you begin assembling everything around the engine, you want to make sure that everything is clean and tidy and inspect any parts for being broken. Parts get dusty, they could have been dirty. This is a good opportunity to clean them. Make sure you're cleaning them with the appropriate chemicals as well as cloths or grits or anything like that. I found that my fuel rail seemed a little dirty, so I used just some Scotch-Brite from the kitchen as well as some alcohol and just cleaned up the tips. Now the coolant system is prone to failing on this car, which I know personally when my car failed on the way home from Pittsburgh. I found that there was quite a few fail points that I had to replace even if I didn't want to, such as the coolant pipe that tucked away under the intake manifold. That had cracked and I didn't even know, and I was driving on it even though the thermostat housing had just been replaced. So it was a good thing that I caught that, as well as replacing the water pump since it's a pain in the ass to get to when it's in the engine, as well as replacing the friction wheel, serpentine belt. So I decided to replace all parts on the coolant system as well as pretty much any auxiliary that was around the engine. I mean, if you're going into this much detail and putting this much time and effort into a build, why stop short of not replacing, the things around it that make it work? In order to see the full glory of the fully forged motor, the stock turbo wasn't going to cut it. So I was lucky enough to partner with JMTC down in Arizona, who hooked me up with their GTD 47mm turbo, which has KO4 internals as well as a 47mm billet compressor, which is an upgrade from the 25mm stock compressor. This should cut it up to about 450 horsepower, which this Mini is not going to see anytime soon. Luckily, JMTC also supplied me with their ported exhaust manifold, which is a stage 3 in their books. To top it off, I decided to take the turbo housing and the exhaust manifold and get them ceramic coated down at Competition while my engine was being rebuilt. Personally, I found that installing the manifold with the turbo housing made the most sense before you put it on, because those bolts are a pain in the butt to get to afterwards. Just make sure you torque them, use copper anti-seize. In some spots you can use aluminum anti-seize. I mean, both are rated for extremely high temperatures, but you're better safe than sorry using the copper anti-seize. Another thing I completely underestimated is all of the gaskets and seals and bolts and things like that that you may have to replace. Make sure you have all the seals so you're not reusing old seals for a new engine. It's also best to check the oil lines and upgrade those. It really is such a cheap upgrade, and I found that when I was inspecting the oil line that fed oil from the engine block to the turbo, that had failed, and that's where a lot of the smoke was coming from and had spewed oil all over the engine block. And if you noticed in the engine removal episode, the whole front of the block under the exhaust manifold was covered in oil, and that would have been where it was coming from and why it kept on burning, because it was just everywhere. So in order to prevent that from happening again and make sure the oil is happily feeding from the engine block to the turbo and back, I replaced the OEM return line and then used NM Engineering's oil line that is upgraded with stainless steel to make sure that that oil line doesn't fail again. Now, putting the engine in by myself wasn't actually as bad as I expected it to be and was easier than taking the engine out, but I think that's partly because I knew how it came out, so analyzing how it went back in was a lot easier. The one thing I would highly recommend is having a leveler. Pretty much if you don't have a leveler for your engine hoist, it's going to be a real pain to get in, because pretty much you have one engine mount on the top that you have to secure to, and the other one comes in from the bottom. So you kind of have to seesaw it in, and that can be very challenging. Overall, I mean, I actually had so much fun putting this engine in, and I mean, I don't think I messed up, but one of the really awkward things about this whole experience is, I mean, I followed all the torque specs. I had kept all the bolts in the right place. I made sure that I had the right tools and was prepared, but ultimately I've put it in and it looks right, but the final call will be when I press that button and the car turns on. Now from here, although the engine mounts and all these braces are on, this is just a test fitment. These have to come off because I do have to do some stuff to the oil cooler, which is going to be coming up in the next episode or the episode after that, after we deal with the body. And there you have it. The engine is in. I mean, it's further along now, but I mean, there's only so much that I can do in an episode. So you're gonna have to tune in next week. If you liked this video, thought it was entertaining, informative, educational, or anything of the above, make sure you give it a like and subscribe. Make sure you share it to any Mini lovers or anybody else that's trying to put an engine in for the first time. Maybe they'll get something out of it. Now, I wouldn't use myself as the only source because I've only done this once and I'm probably missing a bunch of stuff, and there's probably things that I've done wrong. However, I would strongly recommend, if you've got the tools and the time, it's a lot of fun to do if you into torture and pain, I guess. But till next time, have a good one. See you later.